Hello, welcome to my final project for CSIH 3165. I'm really excited about this final project and the course in general, and I feel like I've learned a lot, not just about my dreams, but about myself. And I would really like this project to reflect the essence of my experience in this course. So I've decided to include my own creative process that you can watch alongside of the narration that I will be offering. And throughout this video, I'll be working on an art piece that encapsulates my experience on the topic that I've chosen to explore more deeply through the course. And that is the topic of the use of dreams and dream work to continue bonds with the deceased. Now, surprisingly, I found a lot of interesting literature on this topic, and there are many differences in perspective on continuing bonds. But essentially, continuing bonds is the idea that when someone close to us dies, we may in some ways be able to continue the bond with them. And in prior schools of thought and bereavement, this was kind of an unacceptable idea. Previous theories focused on extinguishing the attachment to the deceased through various, stage-based models and sort of prescriptive treatment methods. And while these models, such as the Kubler-Ross grief stages, have evolved over time and have become less rigid in how the stages are applied, there's still not much consideration given to the continuing bonds approach in these theories. It's really been about ultimately extinguishing the attachment and, that's an indicator of overall health. But before I dig into more about continuing bonds, I'd like to talk a bit about my particular art process that you're viewing right now. This process started with a dream that I had about my father who's deceased. And again, this idea of continuing the bond with him through dreaming has really become important to me. I have chosen to process this dream using features of the integral dreaming practice. Bogzarin, which I'm totally butchering the name, was the first person credited with the development of the integral dreaming practice, or IDP for short. And what I like about this model is that it offers the idea of being with the dream through a non-interpretive and reflective way. Creative expression is also a vital aspect of IDP, and there are typically two phases to this practice: reflective emergence and reflective integration. In reflective emergence, the dreamer might re-enter the dream and use authentic creative expression to understand it in a deeper way. This is the idea that engaging with the creative process in a waking state acts as a similar process to dreaming, and it really awakens the subconscious. Another element of creative expression that exists within the IDP framework is that the art-making process is spontaneous and the dreamer does not deliberately search for any meaning as they create their work. After this exploration, the dreamer is able to use reflective analysis to focus on any pertinent content or any feelings that came up, felt senses, anything that really comes up or arises for them. This contemplative approach to dreaming and searching for within, for the answers almost feels like a heuristic self-study to me, and so I really became fascinated by it. And please keep in mind that as you're viewing me creating the artwork, this is what's going to be in the back of my mind, all of these things about the integral dreaming practice and framework, and really trying to approach my art-making process with spontaneity and play. After considering my dream, I decided to approach the process from a place of not knowing and simply opening myself up to whatever is wanting to emerge from me. After I discuss a bit more about continuing bonds and my dream specifically, I'll talk more about my reflections on the dream and my creative process, and we'll get to that point. Okay, so we talked a little bit about continuing bonds, and it's basically this idea of continuing the connections with the deceased. I first became interested in this process through work done in another course, actually the psychology course that I had with you, Marina, last year, and I found that by engaging in my own creative process, in the presence of my dad's poetry that he created, I was able to generate a response to his poems, and that felt like we were almost having a conversation again. I had no idea what continuing bonds was at the time, or that was even a concept, but I was engaging in a continuing bond with my father through the creative process. In fact, I was a bit stumped about what to do for my final project in that course, and the reason why I started creating artwork was to get some ideas. I happened to have my dad's poem out, and I wanted to use it as inspiration. And anyway, this process happened really organically, but it made me feel like he was really in the room with me, and we were able to connect again. And at the time, I was still very entrenched in the loss. It was so recent, and not only was this a way for me to process the loss further, but it made me realize something. Why was I so focused on the need to relinquish my attachment with my father, and why did I put so much pressure on myself to accept that he was gone? In many ways, I already had accepted he was gone, and I really just missed him, and I missed his energy. I missed his guidance too, And so I began searching and researching, and I found that there was a name for this kind of work, continuing bonds. I felt very comforted in learning about this, and also I felt like I had stumbled upon something really interesting. Could the use of creative expressions of the deceased be used to continue bonds? In my own experience, yes. And as an art therapist, I recognize that this had not been studied in the expressive arts literature, and it's a gap in the literature. And so this has become a big piece of what I've been focusing on at Saybrook. And I'm hoping to build upon this project to see how it can be helpful to others. Right now, I'm at a place where I'm learning so much about continuing bonds, and I'm recognizing that a lot of it's cultural. Some cultures, indigenous cultures particularly, believe that it's not good to continue bonds with the deceased because it may be preventing their spirit from fully crossing over. Other cultures, in the Christian tradition especially, find peace and comfort in knowing that the presence of their loved one is around them. There's been studies on this, and the findings are mixed. Some individuals report that continuing bonds is helpful, and others, for others it's associated with higher levels of distress and lack of adjustment. So part of my work is developing both cultural competency and awareness of the individual needs to determine who is continuing bonds really helpful for. Anyway, that would be a whole other podcast entirely, and maybe the next big area of my searching. I have found so far in my studies that dreams of the deceased show up quite a bit for people, and naturally I began to ask if dreaming might be a way of continuing bonds. This ties into my research interest too, because I'm starting to see that dreaming is sort of a form of creative expression, and it's part of our everyday creativity, which is something I've studied also quite a bit at Saybrook. I think that this is what Bogzarin was alluding to with the integral dreaming practice too, and that there's a similar process involved in creative expression and dreaming. I have so many dreams of my dad, and the themes range from comforting to distressing and everything in between. I thought I'd look at this a bit further. Joshua Black is the predominant researcher right now focusing on continuing bonds with the deceased through dreaming. And he talks about the different kinds of continuing bonds, externalized and internalized. Externalized continuing bonds are like intrusive thoughts or unwanted feelings, the sense of the presence of the deceased resulting from unfinished business, or problems with processing the loss, some evidence that this relates to insecure attachment styles too. So this is generally an undesirable type of continuing bond and one that feels unwanted. Internalized continuing bonds, on the other hand, are on the terms of the bereaved person. They're, related probably to secure attachment that's suspected, in some of the research, and generally are wanted, purposeful contacts with the deceased. And there's still more work that needs to be done here, but there is a clear thread that attachment plays a role in this in some ways, and relates to the nature of the dreams that the individual has, and the continuing bond in the individual's overall adjustment to the loss. Black also found that there's this concept of deliberate rumination, and deliberate rumination is also associated with continuing bonds. And this deliberate rumination may work its way into our dreams. So what is deliberate rumination, really? What it is for grieving individuals, it manifests as intentionally thinking about the deceased and intentionally cultivating that connection through various means. So looking at photographs, participating in rituals or events to connect with the deceased in some way. You could even argue that the art process that I engage in to commune with my dad in some way is a form of deliberate rumination, right? And so as it turns out, deliberate rumination is a primary predictor of post-traumatic growth. And so this is very interesting, right? This idea of deliberate rumination and the internalized continuing bond. And maybe there's something positive there, some way to come out of the trauma and grow in a really profound way. But again, there's more research that needs to be done here. And these are just some of my current thoughts. Let me tell you a little bit about what happened in my dream, and then we'll talk about it more. So there was a big party that was going to be held at my parents' house, and I arrived to the house just moments before the party was supposed to start, and nothing had been set up. People were starting to arrive, but there was no food out, and the house was in disarray and needed to be cleaned. I remember feeling like there was no plan in place, and things were going to just get so busy, and I was feeling really overwhelmed, honestly. And as you know, my father passed away last year. However, in this dream, he was still alive, which also is very interesting. That's a theme that the dreamers often report in a lot of the dreams that they have. There's dreams of their deceased loved ones still being alive and various relationships with them. So in the dream, my dad was scrambling to get things set up for the party. He actually had just mopped all of the floors in the entire house. So it was still wet and it was hard to walk around without slipping. It seemed like there must have been too much soap on the mop or something, and the floors were very sudsy, making it dangerous to walk around. I got really upset with my dad for mopping at this point, and I just felt like it was making things harder, even though he was stressed and he was just trying to do the right thing and he was trying to help and get everything set up. I remember communicating to my dad that I was frustrated with him and worried because people were easily going to fall. My dad said that he was frustrated too, but he didn't personalize it. He said that they should wait until it's dry and it wasn't his responsibility to make sure they didn't walk on the floors. I told him, I know, but it's just unfortunate that they came over early and now we need to figure out how to deal with this. I was thinking, wow, he's still working really hard for his age, mopping those floors. My dad was in his 80s when he died and he looked just as old in the dream. But then I saw that he really wasn't well. He had bandages covering his abdomen, and there was blood dripping everywhere. And then things started to escalate into crisis, and he asked me if I would help him change the bandages. Of course I said yes. And we stopped cleaning immediately, and I just kept realizing how much more impaired he actually was, and he just kept becoming more and more impaired with every moment, and I didn't know what was wrong or what was happening to his body or why he was bleeding. And he seemed to know, though, and I was scared to find out. I almost wish he wouldn't tell me. But he asked if I could help him get to a chair to sit down and so we could change the bandages. And by that point, he could hardly stand. And he was stumbling and blood was getting everywhere. And there were about 3 or 4 chairs in the room. And a few of them were plastic. And there was one that was covered in some kind of like a cloth material. And I didn't want to put him on the cloth chair because I thought that the blood was going to stain it. But he explicitly told me that he didn't want to sit in the plastic chairs because they were really uncomfortable. And I listened and I helped him get up into the chair that he liked. And I was going to take the bandages off. And right before I did, he woke up. I woke up. I guess we both woke up. Honestly, my gut reaction to this dream is that my dad is over here burning the candle at both ends to get the house clean, and I'm over here criticizing him, realizing that he's not even ill. And I thought that he was okay. I didn't even realize he was bleeding everywhere until it was absolutely imperative that I took action. I didn't realize that there was a problem until it was an emergency. But instead of taking the time to be present and to see what was happening, I got upset with him. I was not focusing on his needs. And I cared more about presenting a good image at the stupid party and other people slipping on the wet floors rather than my dad almost falling down because he's sick. Like, why was getting a chair ruined more important than my dad's comfort in this dream? That isn't okay. That would never be okay for me, with the people I love. And all of those people at the party could wait, my dad was more important. And I'm glad that I stopped what I was doing so I could be there for him and with him, even if it felt like it was too late at that point. So this dream was kind of troubling to me, to be honest, and it made me think about my own life and how I tend to focus so hard on my work instead of my own needs or the needs of the people I care about. So this was truly transformative in some ways, and it was difficult to face. I felt like it was a wake-up call. I often forget myself and my own self-care too often. It made me think that if I'm not taking care of myself, perhaps in some ways I'm not taking care of my dad, even though he is deceased. Or maybe I'm not taking care of my ancestors even. Maybe I need to be a conduit for healing and self-care to keep them healthy too. You know, as humans, we often see our purpose in life as to cultivate future generations, but now I'm wondering if part of our purpose is also to heal the past generations, specifically by having a relationship with the deceased. Stanley Krippner says that there's an evolutionary aspect to dreaming, otherwise humans would have stopped dreaming. And so I wonder if this could be part of what he meant, or in some ways related. By not tending to myself, maybe I'm not tending to my dad. Perhaps I wouldn't be able to see it this way unless he came to me in the dream himself and told me. It feels like a clear message to stop focusing on the things that don't matter and to put myself and my loved ones first. You know, in the dream, he was cleaning and working so hard and just doing something to help, but at the time it seemed like he was making things harder for me, and that's interesting. It feels very salient in some ways, right? Like taking care of myself is more work, it's an extra task amid so many other seemingly more important and pressing tasks, but in reality, self-care and care for the people we love is the most important task. So hopefully you've been getting a sense of how this all comes together now through watching my art process, which has been such a wonderful experience for me. And I actually have the same feelings right now that I do anytime I create artwork with my dad in mind, or I create artwork to commune with him. And that is that our bond is continuing through this work. So thank you for allowing me this process today as a means of self-care and to continue to connect with my father. It truly felt good, and thank you for being part of it and witnessing it for me and with me. And through the creation, certain words kept sticking out to me in my mind. I added them as they came up, almost with a stream of consciousness sort of approach, and at the very end, on top of the gray and black swirls that I had written the word demand over, it's on the left side of the page there, I put a new piece of paper in that says, "It's okay, dear." And I felt like this was the voice of my dad, and his forgiveness and compassion towards me, guiding me, reminding me that wherever I'm at, it's okay. This was very comforting, and moving forward, I feel like I'm going to work harder to make decisions to put myself first. As a therapist, it's so easy to get caught up in helping others and meeting all of the expectations and demands for everyone else, and I'm in a continual process to heal and remember that I cannot be all things to all people. So anyway, this has been a bit about my dream and my art process, and I really hope that you enjoyed it. And also, I just really want to say thank you, Marina, for supporting me and guiding me through this whole process, through this course and multiple others. Your feedback has been really invaluable, and your openness and willingness to explore these new and interesting ideas. And I really look forward to your perspectives and thoughts on this project, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your semester. Thank you.